So, I thought today we might think together about simplifying one's life, about simplicity. And, you know, COVID-19 is a little bit of a wake-up call for all of us. And I was thinking about my own life and the wake-up calls that helped me on my spiritual journey. So I thought I'd tell you a little story about one of those, and then we could talk a bit about simplifying. So in 1996, I was living in Chicago, and it was winter, and it was right after Christmas, and my children had come home from college, and I went to bed, and then my son woke me up telling me the house was on fire. So I came out of a sleep and made my way out of the house, watched the fire department come, watched them put out the fire. And then a few days later, what happens if you have a fire is automatically your insurance pays for everything that you own to be cleaned. So it all goes away. Somebody comes and gathers it all up and takes it away, and then they bring it back to you. And everything you own is on a separate coat hanger. So a mitten has its own coat hanger, and a sock has its own coat hanger, and a coat, etc. So about a week after this happened, I was looking out the window down at the street, and I saw two vans pull up. And out of these two vans came all of my clothes. And I was mortified. I was so embarrassed that I owned two vans full of clothes. These were just my clothes. So I decided in that moment that I no longer wanted to own those things, clean those things, store them, insure them, etc. And I vowed to simplify my life. It took me 10 years, even with an intentional plan to simplify my life. So it's not so easy. Now, I think COVID-19 is similar. I think it's a wake-up call. And the way that it happened was, for me and maybe for you, I had a big life on my calendar. I had trips I was going to take. I had meetings that I was going to be in. The calendar was almost full all the way through to November. And then suddenly, with no notice, everything left the calendar. The trips were canceled, the meetings were canceled, and I was at home, like all of you. And what happened for me was I began to think, well, just how necessary were all these meetings and all these trips that I had arranged my life around? So, and the space that got created after it was wonderful. I mean, I loved being at home. I found myself cleaning things and throwing out more things and creating a sacred space in my home. Now, anyone on a spiritual path eventually, I think, gets to this question about simplicity. Like if you meet enlightened souls, if you met Dadi Janki, if you ever met the Dalai Lama, they're almost all the same in certain ways. They're very light, they're very funny, and they're very simple. They aren't complicated people. So if we've decided that we want to be on a spiritual path, then we have to ask ourselves about simplicity. So I would say for most people in the developed world, our lives have gotten very complicated. We have these relationships with Amazon where we just think of what we want and order it and it arrives soon. Or we have these phones that are filled with our photos and our calendar and all these things, these apps, games, and um, podcast and all these things that we're tied into. And we just have so many things that bind us into our lives. If you think for a minute about your own life, so just reflect on your own life, the house you're in, or the apartment, or the condo, or whatever, and how you have to look after it, right? You have to make sure it's insured and it's clean and it's maintained and all of that, all the appliances in it. Your car, is it inspected? Is it insured? Is it washed? Is it filled with gas, etc.? Your finances, your bank accounts, your credit cards. If you're carrying debt, your debt. If you're carrying mortgages, your mortgages. Your calendar, all the things that sit on your calendar as obligations. And so when we have these complicated lives, and then you move on to a spiritual path, and the first thing someone says to you, well, turn inside. And you turn inside, and what is there is chaos, right? Your calendar pulling on you, and your all these things you own pulling at you that you have to pay attention. Lists in the mind are these lists. So it's very hard to move on to the spiritual path and be making progress when you have a complicated life, because your complicated life makes for a burdened mind. And it's very hard when you have a burdened mind to even get at the true self. So that's why at some point we find ourselves yearning for a simple life. But we often have no idea where to start, no idea how to start to unravel this complicated life we've created. And of course, if you're caring for other people, your parents or children or friends or whatever, even more complicated. So where to start, right? So that's why the COVID-19 virus was so handy, because it took a lot of things off the calendar right away and took us back to a very simple moment. So I think we don't have time to make a plan together. We only have a few minutes together. So I think let's take our few minutes and let's think about what happens for us when our life gets simple. I'm just going to presume that you would be successful with your simplification. But what happens when you get a simple mind, a clear mind, and a simple life? For one thing, with a clear mind and a simple life, you can know the true self. The self that is more essential than your titles or your labels or your obligation or your bank account or your vacations. The inner self that's beneath all of that, the essential vibration, the essential energy that is you. You come to know that only in the silence of a quiet mind. You don't come to know that through any other method. You have to go inside in silence to find that simple self, that clear space where you can get to the essence. And the other thing that can happen once that has happened is you can experience the very subtle current of God's presence. I sometimes have said that if there were a person playing the flute or the piccolo in Times Square, with all the traffic and the lights and all that, would anyone hear him? But when the mind gets quiet, today someone might hear him because the traffic is quiet. It's the same with the mind. When the mind gets quiet, then you can feel the current of God's presence. And there's nothing more transformative or exhilarating than that. So let's take a few minutes and let's go inside. I hope you're in a place where you can actually reflect. So, sitting quietly, we turn the mind's eye away from the noise of the world. and into the quiet place inside. Now, when you get inside, it may be that I don't feel very quiet. It may be that actually there's a lot in there. I might have my to-do list. I might have my calendar. So just take a minute and notice when you turned inside, what did you find? And then quietly just remove that from the mind. Just as if it's an object, you just pick it up and you take it out of the mind. Take out the list, take out the calendar, and just allow the mind to get empty and simple. And then turn your attention. You'll notice when your mind gets quiet like that, you'll realize that the breath is there quietly working every moment. Every moment since you entered the world, it's in and out. In and out, in the background, without us even noticing. So just follow the breath for a few breaths. And then take your attention to the seat of the soul, right behind the eyes. So this is where I, the soul, sit inside this body. The soul is a point of conscient light energy, so that there's a vibration to each soul. You might say it's your signature vibration. So if you spend a lot of time feeling anxious, then your signature vibration is going to feel a bit anxious. And if you spend a lot of time feeling sad, the soul's going to sing kind of a sad song. But the aim of a spiritual life is to make that song of the soul a happy and loving song. And to make the vibrations in the soul peaceful, pure, loving, kind, compassionate, joyful. That's the spiritual work. That's why we come onto a spiritual path. So that we can change the song of the soul, the vibration of the soul, the essential feeling or experience of the soul back to its original beauty. So just take a moment, listen to the song of the soul, the vibration of the soul, and experience what you are when you're in pure happiness. And then in that state, only when you're in that state can you then turn your attention up and feel the current of the source, of the parent of the soul, of God. This amazing current of power and purity, moral beauty, virtue, love, light comes streaming into the soul. It can take your breath away. That's the experience we're after. That connection between the soul and the source, between the soul and its parent, that joyful, transformative link, that's what's possible. So even as you come back into your life and move through your life, do that with a commitment to simplicity. Om Shanti.